The night I found out I wasn't my mother's biological daughter, no one raised their voice. There was just one question, and then a pause that lasted too long. I was standing in the kitchen with my test results open on my phone. My hand was sweating so badly I almost dropped it. I looked at her and asked the simplest question of my life. Mom, how is this possible? She didn't answer. She didn't pretend she didn't understand. She didn't ask what I meant. She didn't say the lab must have made a mistake. She just stood there by the sink. Her fingers pressed against the counter like she needed something solid to hold her up. That was the moment I got scared. Because until then, I still believed there had to be a simple explanation. A number I remembered wrong. A lab error. A misunderstanding that would end in relief. But my mother pulled out a chair, sat down slowly, and looked at me with a kind of exhaustion I had never seen before. It wasn't the look of someone caught in a lie. It was the look of someone who had spent years praying this moment would never come. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. No anger, no defense, no escape. I always knew this day might come. My heart started pounding. And then she said the sentence that split my life into before and after. You were never my biological daughter. That was it. The fridge was still humming. The kitchen light was still on. My mother was still sitting right there. But nothing was the same. And the worst part is, the first thing I felt wasn't anger. It was guilt. Like I had dragged something out of her she had spent my whole life trying to keep buried. Like I was the one doing something wrong, just for finally asking the right question. If you want to understand how one simple medical test led me to hear, in my own kitchen, that I was never the biological daughter of the woman who raised me, stay with me. Because this story doesn't begin with that sentence. It begins the day I realized the numbers in my life didn't add up. Have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror and felt that something didn't fit, even if you couldn't explain why? My name is Maya Collins. I'm 23 years old. I study psychology, a common path for people who try to understand others while learning how to hold themselves together inside. Since I was a child, people say I'm different, never as criticism, always as praise, exotic, unique, striking. I learned early how to smile when I hear it. I learned even earlier not to ask what it really means. In family photos, there is a predictable harmony. My parents, my uncles, my cousins, features repeating like a clean pattern. Light eyes, similar jawlines, nearly identical noses. When I look at myself among them, I feel a small rupture. Nothing dramatic, just enough to be tiring. I ignored it for years. Functioning became my survival skill. Good grades, few complaints, emotions carefully organized on the outside. At college, I keep myself neutral. I don't exaggerate with clothes, opinions, or feelings. It feels safer to take up less space. Still, I wake up tired, not physically. It's a sustaining kind of tired. In recent months, I started checking a mild hormonal imbalance. Something common in young women. Nothing urgent. My doctor suggested a simple elective procedure to avoid future complications. Before that, routine tests. Blood work, questionnaires, protocols. At the lab, everything felt overly clean. The smell of antiseptic, the cold metal chair, the professional silence. The needle went in quickly, a brief sting. I watched the vial fill slowly, bright red against clear glass. A strange tingling crept up my neck. Not fear. Something quieter. As if something inside me had been touched without my permission. Nothing that deserved emotional attention. That's what I told myself. Still, I left feeling different. Not scared, just unsettled. A sense of expectation without an object. Like being on the verge of remembering something important I had never lived. I tried to rationalize it. Stress, college, adult life starting for real. I told myself it would pass. While I waited for the results, old details gained weight, casual comments, family silences, questions I never asked because they felt unnecessary or inconvenient. I began to notice how much I had adapted without realizing it. How normal it felt not knowing where some parts of me came from. When the email arrived, I didn't open it right away, not out of fear, out of habit. I opened it later that night, sitting on my bed, the room dim and quiet. I read too fast. Technical terms, percentages, standard notes, nothing stood out, yet something in me slowed down. I went back a few lines, read again. A light pressure formed in my chest. Not shock, disorientation, as if someone had moved a piece of furniture and my body noticed before my mind did. I closed the laptop, opened it again. The information was still there, silent, waiting. I thought about my childhood, the constant sense of not belonging, the effort it took to appear normal. Maybe I was never strange. Maybe I just learned too early how to adapt. I didn't reach any conclusions. Not yet. But something shifted. For the first time, my confusion didn't feel empty. It felt like a beginning, even before I understood what that paper was trying to tell me. In the days that followed, I kept functioning. I woke up early, I went to class, I turned in assignments, I answered messages like always. On the outside, nothing had changed. On the inside, I avoided any thought that asked for too much attention. I told myself that test meant nothing. Lab results fail. Context gets lost. People misread things. It was easier to believe that. In my biological psychology class, the professor talked about basic heredity. Nothing heavy. Just simple examples, transmission systems, predictable patterns. He mentioned blood type as a clean model, something everyone had seen, but almost no one connected to real life. I took notes automatically. Type A, type B, type O, possible combinations, impossible combinations. My body reacted before my mind did. Heat rushed into my face. A small tightness gathered in my stomach. I remembered my mother's blood type, my father's too. I remembered because they always talked about it like it was personality, like blood was temperament. Then I remembered mine. I knew enough to understand that some numbers do not add up, and I did not want to push. For the rest of the class, I kept repeating that memory is unreliable, that I could be mixing things up, that it was not practically important. I walked out with steady steps, like I could outrun a dangerous thought before it took root. At home, I avoided the subject. I avoided the email. I avoided the mirror. When my mother asked if everything was fine with the tests, I answered too fast. Yes, all normal. She nodded, satisfied with a short reply. I noticed how good we were at keeping conversations safe. I was good at it too. I used to be proud of it. But for the first time, that pride felt expensive. That night, I opened my laptop again, not to reread the whole report, just to confirm one detail. Then another. My heart beat harder, but my face stayed neutral, as if neutrality could protect me. Maybe it was a reference error. Maybe the history was incomplete. Maybe I was overreacting. That was what I repeated. Maybe. But denial has a specific weight. It exhausts you. It demands constant surveillance. Every thought has to be pushed away before it fully forms. Every memory has to be reinterpreted. Every sensation has to be reduced into an acceptable explanation. Lying in the dark, the tiredness returned. Not physical, the other kind. And then I understood something that stole my breath, not from fear, from clarity. I was not confused. I was resisting looking, resisting asking, resisting admitting that some questions had already begun to exist, even without answers. Maybe I was not ready for the truth, but I was no longer willing to pretend nothing was happening. And when that sentence formed inside me, I felt silence, a full silence, not peace, preparation. The conversation did not happen all at once. It built up, in small hesitations, in unfinished sentences, in looks that lasted 1 second longer than they should have. I rehearsed questions for days. Every version felt wrong, too direct, too cruel. Even when they came wrapped in care, deep down, I did not want answers. I wanted permission to keep living without them. But guilt has its own movement. It does not shout. It seeps in. I started noticing how my mother avoided certain topics, how her tone shifted when I mentioned doctors, tests, family history. Nothing obvious, just an excessive caution, a kind of care that felt like protection, but also fear. That night, it was just the two of us in the kitchen, dishes done, low light, an old tiredness filling the room. I knew that if I did not ask then, I never would. I said the name of the test. She stopped moving. I said some things did not add up. She took a deep breath. I asked if there was something I needed to know. She sat down. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy with intention. She did not cry. She did not defend herself. She did not rush to explain. She said she had always feared that moment, that she promised herself that if it ever came, she would not lie. She said I was not her biological daughter, that I never had been, that it changed nothing about her love, but it changed the story. As she spoke, something unexpected happened inside me. I did not feel anger. I felt guilt. Guilt for asking. Guilt for suspecting. Guilt for making her relive something she tried to keep at peace for so many years. She spoke about the egg donor. Few words. Enough. She said it was a medical choice, a decision made with hope, not secrecy. She said she believed it would never matter. That love would be enough. I listened in silence, and I understood something painful. I was carrying a guilt that was not mine, but it was not only hers either. It was inherited guilt, passed down not through blood, but through silence, through excessive care, through fear of hurting, through the constant attempt to protect. I realized my whole life had been built around not causing pain, around being easy, around fitting in. Maybe because, without knowing it, I sensed that my existence had begun with difficult choices made by someone else. When I went to my room, I did not feel betrayed. I felt responsible for emotions no one had asked me to hold. That was when something shifted. And for the first time, I considered that maybe I could exist without apologizing. That thought did not fix everything, but it was enough for me to schedule my first therapy session the following week. The first therapy session did not begin with words. It began with silence. I sat in the chair across from the therapist and felt my entire body tighten, as if I were about to be evaluated. I smiled out of reflex. A polite smile, functional. The same one I have used my whole life to move through difficult conversations without exposing too much. She asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. The answer came out automatically. Clean. Rehearsed. Only later did I realize how empty that word was. Fine meant nothing. It was just a way not to say afraid. Afraid of crying. Afraid of looking weak. Afraid of opening a door I would not know how to close. As I talked about college, about the surgery, about practical things, my body revealed what I was trying to hide. Cold hands, shallow breathing, a constant tightness in my chest, as if I were taking up space I had not earned the right to occupy. The therapist listened without interrupting. Then she asked something simple. What are you avoiding feeling? The question hung in the air. My heart raced. In that moment, I realized my greatest fear was not the truth about my origin. It was what would happen to me if I let that truth pass through me. I had always believed that feeling too much was dangerous, that deep emotions meant losing control, and I needed control in order to function. I had spent my whole life functioning. I talked about my mother, about the conversation, about the guilt. As I spoke, I felt ashamed of how much I still tried to protect her, even there, even in that safe space, as if my role were to cushion everything, including my own pain. The therapist said something that did not sound like advice. It sounded like a mirror. You learned early that feeling could hurt someone. That sentence stayed with me. I understood that my emotional fear was not weakness. It was strategy, an intelligent, exhausting way to survive. I did not avoid feelings out of cowardice. I avoided them because at some point, it was necessary. That realization shifted something inside me. For the first time, I did not judge myself for being afraid. I recognized fear as part of my story, not as a flaw. It did not need to be in control, but it also did not need to disappear. Leaving the session, I walked slowly to my car. My body felt heavier, but my mind felt strangely clear. Fear was still there. It had not gone away. But now it had a name, a shape. And when something has a name, it stops being an invisible monster. I understood that emotional fear does not disappear when we are strong. It transforms when we are honest. And that day, for the first time, I was not brave, honest. The longing arrived without warning. It was not tied to a memory. It came as absence. I noticed it in small moments, passing storefront windows and wondering who I might have been if I had grown up in another body, inside another story. Hearing women laugh, women who looked alike, and feeling a quiet tightening in my chest, as if I had lost something I was never allowed to know. In therapy, I began to speak less about facts and more about sensations. I talked about a strange emptiness that was hard to explain. It was not clear sadness. It was not envy. It was nostalgia without memory, a loss without a face. The therapist called it grief, not for what happened, but for what never did. That idea stayed with me for days. I started imagining the woman who donated the egg, not as a real person, but as a possibility. Features that could have been mine. Stories I never lived. A childhood where maybe I would not have had to explain myself so often. Where my face did not invite silent questions. Those thoughts came with guilt. I wondered if feeling this way was a betrayal. If wanting to know that absence diminished the love I had for my parents. If I was being ungrateful for missing something that was never mine. It took time to accept that longing does not follow logic. It simply exists. One day, I found an old photo of my mother, young, before me. I smiled when I recognized gestures I had learned from her. The way she held a glass, the way she tilted her head when listening. I realized that even without shared blood, we shared time, and time builds roots too. Still, the longing remained, not as sharp pain, as an echo. That was when I understood something new. My life was not missing pieces. It had layers, some visible, others only imagined. The longing for what never was not a hole to be filled, but a space to be acknowledged. In the next session, I said something out loud that I had never fully formed before. I missed the person I could have been. Saying it, I felt my body soften, as if naming the absence gave it a place to exist without controlling me. I realized I did not have to choose between stories. I could honor the one I lived and still mourn the one that never happened. One did not cancel the other. That understanding brought a new kind of sadness. Quieter. More honest. And strangely, it brought relief. The longing did not ask for action. It asked to be heard. And when I listened, something settled inside me. I was not complete, but I was whole enough to keep going. The anger did not arrive as an explosion. It arrived as contained heat. I kept going to class, to sessions, to appointments, everything in place, everything functional. But something inside me began to harden. Small irritations appeared without warning. Excessive noise in the library, casual comments about appearance, innocent questions that felt too light for what I was carrying. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not complain. The anger settled inside me, silent and persistent. I noticed it first in my body, a tight jaw, lifted shoulders, a constant urgency, as if I were always late for something I could not name. In therapy, my answers became shorter, more objective, as if going deeper were too dangerous. Until one day, the therapist asked something simple. "Who are you angry at?" The question cut through me. My immediate answer was no one. But my body disagreed. I thought about the doctors who treated my origin like a technical detail. The old comments about my appearance, the curious looks. I thought about my mother, not because of the decision itself, but because of the long silence. I thought about myself, for accepting everything so easily. The anger began to take shape. I realized I had been taught to be grateful before being whole, to accept incomplete explanations, to smile when something hurt, to understand others before understanding myself. That emotional training protected me for a long time, but it also kept me quiet. That was when something shifted. I understood that my anger was not ingratitude. It was a delayed boundary. I was angry for not having a choice, for not having words, for learning too early that questioning could hurt someone. That realization brought fear, because anger had always seemed dangerous to me. I associated it with loss of control, with injustice, with people who cause harm, never with something legitimate inside myself. But in that moment, I saw that anger can also be a sign of integrity, an internal alert that something crossed a line, a late request for respect. That week, I started saying small no's. I declined invitations I did not want to accept. I corrected comments I would have let pass before. Not with aggression, with calm firmness. Each no created an internal tremor, but also relief. I understood that my anger did not want to destroy anything. It wanted to return me to myself. In the mirror, I began to see myself differently, not as someone difficult to place, but as someone who spent too long reshaping herself. Quiet anger did not push me away from the people I loved. It brought me closer to who I am. For the first time, I felt I could take up space without asking permission. Hope appeared quietly, almost politely. After the quiet anger, I began to believe that some answers might ease the weight. Not all of them, just enough to organize the chaos. I thought that understanding my origin better could bring a practical kind of peace, a logical fit, a temporary ending. In therapy, I spoke about this carefully, as if hope were too fragile to expose. The therapist listened and asked what I expected to find. I answered without thinking, something that would explain me. The sentence stayed with me. I started researching donation banks, old procedures, stories from other women. Everything felt technical, distant, impersonal. Still, I felt a contained excitement, almost embarrassing, as if I were about to touch a missing piece of my own story. I contacted the clinic where the procedure had been done, filled out forms, sent documents, waited. Each automated reply fed the feeling that something was moving forward. When the call finally came, I was sitting in my car before going inside. I answered with my heart racing, trying to sound calm. The voice on the other end was kind, professional, precise. She explained that, at the time, donations were anonymous, that records were limited, that no additional information was available, no name, no photo, no possibility of contact. I thanked her. I hung up. I stayed there for a few minutes, staring at the steering wheel, feeling a different kind of emptiness. Not confusion, not anger, a clean break. The quiet collapse of an expectation I had never fully admitted. I realized that somewhere inside me, I believed that woman could offer me something essential, a definitive answer, a more comfortable mirror, maybe even a late sense of belonging. None of that would come. The hope I had built so carefully dissolved without drama, without villains, without blame, just reality. In the next session, I shared what happened. As I spoke, I noticed something unexpected. I was not devastated. I was sad, yes, but I was also clear. I understood that I had placed too much weight on an external possibility, as if someone, somewhere, could fix something that was mine to face. Broken hope revealed a simple truth. No external information would do that work for me. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. For the first time, I accepted that my story would not have every answer, and that maybe this was not a flaw. Maybe it was an invitation to build meaning instead of waiting to receive it ready-made. Hope did not disappear. It changed places. It stopped living in someone I would never meet. And slowly, carefully, it began to live in me. Courage did not arrive as strength. It arrived as hesitation. After hope broke, I did not feel empty. I felt exposed, as if there was nowhere left to place my expectations. Without external answers, there was only me, and that alone was frightening. In therapy, I began to notice a new movement. It was not enthusiasm. It was cautious willingness, a timid desire to try something different, even without guarantees. The therapist called it fragile courage, the kind that does not shout, does not rush, but still moves. I started noticing this courage in small gestures. When I stopped hiding my doubts in casual conversations, when I admitted I did not know who I was without apologizing for it. When I stopped softening my words to avoid discomfort. None of it was comfortable. In class, a colleague mentioned, without bad intentions, that I looked different, interesting. Before, I would have laughed, turned it into something light. That day, I simply said those comments had always left me confused. My voice was low, but steady. The silence that followed was brief, but it was enough. My heart raced. Still, I did not pull back. That was when I understood something essential. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision not to hide from it. I was afraid the entire time. Afraid of seeming too sensitive. Afraid of being seen as complicated. Afraid of losing the image of the one who always managed. And yet, I kept going. At home, I began asking different questions. Not to get final answers, but to understand stories. In one of those conversations, I asked my mother how she felt the first time she held me. She paused before answering. Then she said something simple. She said she did not think about genetics. She said she did not think about eggs. She said she thought about the time I had spent inside her. She spoke about her belly growing, about her body learning my rhythm, about the fear of not being enough, about waiting. She said love came from there, from shared time, from daily care, from carrying me, even without having created me. Hearing that did not fix anything right away, but something settled. I realized that fragile courage also means staying in difficult conversations without running, listening without turning it into defense, accepting that some truths coexist, even when they do not fit perfectly. For years, I confused strength with rigidity. I thought being strong meant not wavering, not doubting, not needing. Now, I was beginning to understand that strength can also be flexibility, the ability to adapt without disappearing. One day, looking at myself in the mirror, I noticed something different. Not in my features, in my posture. My shoulders were less tense, my gaze less guarded. Insecurity was still there, but there was space around it. That was when something changed. I did not need to be whole to keep moving. I could walk while I was still being built. That idea did not bring euphoria. It brought stability. Fragile courage did not promise clear endings, but it offered presence. And in that moment, that was enough. The mask did not fall all at once. It began to crack. Small fractures showed up in daily life. I forgot prepared answers, missed the timing of the right smile. Sometimes I stayed quiet when lightness was expected. It was not rebellion, it was fatigue. Holding up my functional version started to demand more energy than I had. I noticed it on an ordinary morning. I woke up late, spilled coffee in the sink, looked for a shirt I could not find. Nothing serious. Still, something gave way. I sat on the bed and stayed there. No crying, no thinking, just still. The world did not collapse, but the inner urgency did. In therapy, I tried to explain the feeling. I said I felt exposed, as if everyone could see what I had avoided seeing myself. The therapist asked what I feared losing if I stopped maintaining that image. The question stayed with me all day. At college, a group presentation went differently than planned. I got confused, asked to repeat a part. My voice faltered for a second. Before, I would have covered it with humor or over-preparation. This time, I just continued. No one commented. Nothing happened. It was strange to realize the world did not demand perfection. I did. Letting the mask loosen began to hurt when I saw how much that structure had both protected and limited me. The image of the calm, capable girl had been useful. It opened doors, avoided conflict, earned approval, but it also kept me far from myself. At home, I stopped over-explaining. When people asked how I was, I told the truth I could reach. Tired, confused. In process, some people pulled back a little, others came closer in a new way. Nothing dramatic, just real. One night, I looked through old photos on my phone. I saw versions of myself smiling in different moments. I recognized the effort in each one. I did not feel shame. I felt respect. That invisible armor had been necessary, but it was no longer enough. The decisive moment came quietly. I received praise for something I was not trying to prove, and I realized I did not need to perform to deserve space. The realization was silent and deep. I understood that letting the mask fall did not mean losing my identity. It meant making room for something more honest. I did not become someone new. I stopped being rigid. By accepting that I did not know, could not control, did not need to please all the time, I felt an unexpected relief, like taking off a heavy coat on a day that no longer needs protection. The mask fell, and in its place, there was presence, still imperfect, but alive. Reconnection did not come as an answer, it came as listening. After losing the mask, I spent a few days unusually quiet, not empty, quiet on the inside, as if something was reorganizing itself without asking for my permission. I kept going to college, to therapy, to life, but without the urgency I used to carry, without the impulse to fix everything right away. I noticed this one afternoon, sitting alone on a bench on campus. I watched people walk by, loose conversations, distant laughter. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel the urge to compare myself or explain myself. I just stayed. That simple act scared me. I had always believed that if I stopped thinking, something important would slip away. That vigilance was care, that self-control was maturity. Sitting there, still, I understood that this belief had pushed me away from myself. In therapy, I talked about this new sensation. I said it felt like I was finding myself in small places, in the rhythm of my breath, in the way I walked, in how my body reacted before my mind did. The therapist asked, when was the last time I trusted myself without needing validation? I could not answer. Inner reconnection began when I stopped treating my emotions as problems to be solved. Instead, I started listening to them as signals. Tiredness became a request for rest. Insecurity became a need for care. Sadness became an invitation to withdraw, not to correct. The shift was subtle, but deep. One day, reviewing old notes from college, I found a text I had written about identity. I read it as if it belonged to someone else. It said that identity is not fixed, but a process in constant dialogue with experience. I smiled when I realized I had always known this. I just had never applied it to myself. That was the moment something changed. I understood that I did not need to integrate everything at once, or choose between versions of myself. I could be made of layers, of crossed stories, of learned affections and inherited traits. Nothing had to be erased for something new to exist. At home, I began creating small rituals, walks without headphones, writing without a goal, moments of silence before sleep, not as self-improvement techniques, as presence. Inner reconnection did not turn me into someone confident all the time. There were still doubts, still fear. But something new was holding it all together, an inner axis less dependent on external eyes. For the first time, I felt that I was with myself, not observing, not evaluating. With myself. That feeling did not bring euphoria, it brought alignment. I did not have all the answers, but I had access to myself, and that changed everything. Acceptance did not arrive as a conclusion, it arrived as an agreement. After inner reconnection, I noticed something had shifted in how I judged myself. It was not indulgence. It was not giving up. It was a quiet negotiation with myself. A new understanding that living does not require total coherence, only enough honesty to keep going. I began to see this in small choices. On days when I did not perform as expected and did not turn that into punishment. In moments of insecurity that I no longer rushed to fix, I still wanted to do well. I just did not need to hurt myself to get there. In therapy, I talked about this strange state. It was not full peace. It was something less stable. The therapist said it sounded like imperfect acceptance. A way of holding your own story without demanding that everything makes sense at once. The phrase stayed with me. I started looking at my path with less rigidity. The girl who tried to fit in, the young woman who confused perfection with belonging, the daughter who carried silent guilt, none of them were wrong. All of them were surviving with the tools they had. That realization changed my gaze. One day, organizing old drawers, I found objects I had kept without knowing why. Photos, notes, Small symbols of versions of myself I had almost forgotten. Instead of throwing them away, I sat on the floor and looked, not to organize, to recognize. That was when I understood something simple and deep. I did not need to fix my past in order to move forward. Imperfect acceptance did not erase pain. It changed its role. Pain stopped being proof of failure and became proof of passage. Something that hurt because it mattered. Something that marked me because it was lived. In conversations with my mother, I stopped seeking repair. I began seeking presence. We talked about ordinary things. We laughed. Sometimes silence appeared. And that was okay. I no longer needed to solve our entire story to feel whole. The decisive moment came on a quiet afternoon. I caught my reflection in a store window. I saw features that used to confuse me, and I did not feel the urge to explain. I did not feel the need to justify. I simply recognized myself. It was not pride, it was permission. Accepting imperfectly meant letting go of the ideal version of myself, the one who would understand everything, overcome everything, integrate everything with clarity. In her place appeared someone more real, someone able to live with questions without urgency. In the end, I realized acceptance did not close me. It opened me. I was not resolved, I was available, and for the first time, that felt like enough. Rebirth did not happen on the day everything made sense. It happened on an ordinary day. I woke up without that old urgency to define myself. There was no revelation, no certainty, just a lighter body getting out of bed, a different kind of silence inside me. Less tense, less demanding. For the first time, I did not feel the need to prove anything before starting the day. I noticed it while getting ready for college. I chose my clothes without thinking about effect. I did not try to hide certain features. I did not try to highlight others. I simply got dressed. That simple gesture moved me more than any answer I had ever searched for. In class, I listened more than I spoke. Not out of fear, out of presence. I wrote down ideas that resonated with me. I ignored the ones that did not. For the first time, I felt I could learn without comparing myself, as if my story had stopped competing with everyone else's. In therapy, I spoke little. I only said that something had changed. The therapist asked what. I thought before answering. I said I was no longer trying to become someone acceptable. I was learning how to inhabit who I already was. That sentence stayed with me. I realized that rebirth did not require erasing the past. It rested on it. Every phase I had crossed left something useful behind. Confusion taught me to question. Guilt showed me limits. Anger gave me space back. Broken hope brought responsibility. Fragile courage taught me to move without guarantees. Imperfect acceptance gave me continuity. Nothing had been wasted. At home, I talked with my mother calmly. Not about genetics, about plans, about simple things. I laughed when I noticed how our relationship had changed without formal agreements. There was more truth, less excessive care, more presence. Later, I walked alone through the neighborhood. I watched my reflection in store windows, as I had done so many times before. But something was different. I was not looking for confirmation. I was not searching for explanations. I simply recognized myself. It was not pride, it was familiarity. The decisive moment came without announcement. I understood that my identity did not need to be discovered. It could be built, day by day, through small choices, with honesty, with gentleness toward myself. That was when I felt rebirth. Not as someone new, but as someone whole. Whole because I no longer needed to split myself into versions. Whole because I could hold doubt without collapsing. Whole because I no longer needed permission to exist. The future was still uncertain. There were unanswered questions, insecurities that had not disappeared, but there was something firm holding everything together. Me. Rebirth did not promise constant happiness. It offered direction, and in that moment, that was more than enough to keep going. I did not find a final answer. I found myself, not as someone fixed, not as someone complete, but as someone allowed to exist without explanation. Some truths do not arrive to break us, they arrive to return us. And if any part of this story felt familiar, If you have ever carried questions without permission to ask them, know this: you are not alone. There are more stories like this here. Stories for the parts of us that are still becoming. Stay, if you want.